Hey guys, good evening. I hope you are doing well wherever you are in the world right now. So, this video that I'm doing right now came from a lot of suggestions and feedback that I've received, not only from clients, but from everyone on LinkedIn as well. It's one thing to put out an article or to comment on a post or something like that, but what I want to do here is give you a before and after video showing what I typically see on resumes from a variety of different audiences to what I think the measurable impact should be from those fairly generic examples. One caveat before we get started, these are my opinions based upon my experience in law enforcement, my transition to the private sector, having been a hiring manager in the private sector and having been a recruiter as well, which I think gives me a pretty unique perspective. But it should also be noted that there's a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B, and my way is not the only way. So just keep that in mind. Before we actually jump through and we start going through the slides, I'll say the same thing to you, whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, that I say to every single person I have a 30-minute conversation with through my website or just in general. Every single skill that you have is directly transferable to the private sector. Usually it's just in a different language. And that's the number one problem that people have, generally speaking, is how do I translate my specialized experience into terminology that no matter who the reader is, whether it's a 20-year-old fresh out of college or an experienced recruiter, they can see, understand, and most importantly, can correlate to the job description in question. The biggest thing that I see, and what you'll see here, is very generic information on a resume, meaning it's like you just copied and pasted your job description onto a resume. The whole purpose of a resume is to separate you from everybody else. It's to get you to that interview. It's to provide concrete examples of how you fulfill the job requirements and why ultimately you're the best fit for the position in question. If the recruiter or the hiring manager can't understand what it is you do for a living, and more importantly, they can't correlate it to the job description, you might as well have not even applied in most cases. Because again, we only have a limited number of time in our day to review a resume and compare it to a job description. Most recruiters are not going to spend the time trying to figure it out. They're just going to move on to the next qualified applicant. So I'm going to go through the typical audience that I talk to, but I'm also going to talk about a number of other audiences as well, because again, this applies to everything. So we're going to start with local law enforcement. Local is the same as state law enforcement for the purposes of this presentation. So decrease crime through proactive patrols. This is a fairly standard bullet point on anyone who's ever been in a patrol car. The problem is that's pretty obvious. You know, having a presence automatically forces people to think about things, but it doesn't really apply in the private sector unless you're going to go into contract security or something like that. What you want to do is you want to show, what did that actually mean? Talk to me about problem solving. Talk to me about critical thinking. You know, when you're on a beat in a patrol car, you're a problem solver. You're responding to calls for service. You're self-initiating proactive activity. You're doing all of this stuff, and you need to talk about why it matters and provide examples. So the example I provided was, instead of saying decrease crime through proactive patrols, you identified a hotspot for crime, maybe calls for service shot up exponentially at a 24-hour fitness, and you implemented a crime prevention plan, which is a super sexy way if you got with other units and your crime analysis team. Maybe you put a pole cam up, maybe you put a UC in the parking lot, maybe you sat around the corner and you did a sting. Whatever the case may be, crime prevention plan encompasses that. And then over the course of the operation, you guys saw a 45% drop in that call for service. Maybe it was a vehicle break-in, purse snatching, whatever the case may be, over 3 months. So if you look at the difference between these two, one is something that's very, very specific to law enforcement. And people are like, okay, how does that correlate to the private sector? And then the second example, which is the after, is exactly what you did and then what the result is. So many people say, I did something, but they don't talk about what's on the other side of the equal sign. And that's really, really important from a private sector point of view. It's all about ROI. Second example, managed a team and oversaw a budget. Okay, this is not completely without value. The fact that you oversaw a team and oversaw a budget, big things. Identify what that is though. Did you oversee one person? Did you oversee 20? Numbers help show scope and complexity. Super important here. So the example I put was manage 12 direct reports, 4 indirect reports, and $150,000 overtime budget. Identify what you've done and ultimately why it matters. If I'm looking for a people manager who oversees 2 people versus someone who oversees 15, that's a big difference in the span of control. And so having an understanding of how many people you've supervised, and by the way, direct reports, that means people you're doing performance evaluations for. So law enforcement guys, if you're a lieutenant and you have 4 sergeants underneath your command, those are your direct reports. All of the officers and everyone who report to those sergeants, those are indirect reports. Just FYI. Next example, wrote reports and conducted investigations focused on narcotics, violent crime, etc. Again, pretty simple, pretty average bullet point you would find on a typical police officer job description. Now let's talk about how many investigations did you conduct? Again, you don't have to be assigned to a specialized investigative unit to conduct investigations. If you're in patrol, you do investigations every single day. Now, you may not take it from start to finish, but you're still doing an investigation. You're still writing a report. Maybe you're doing an interview on scene. All of that counts. So don't get lost in the weeds here. So conducted 200 interviews and investigations encompassing financial crimes, workplace violence, theft, and more. You'll notice that I don't talk about narcotics or homicides because that stuff really doesn't necessarily apply to the private sector. The closest you could get there is workplace violence, meaning employee on employee, sexual harassment, assault, stuff like that. All that is encompassed within workplace violence. So if you do internal and misconduct investigations, or you focus on equal opportunity employment or EEOC, like bullying, harassment, discrimination, stuff like that, that's all encompassed within workplace violence. Financial crimes, fairly common term in the private sector. Theft definitely happens in the private sector as well. Ultimately, you want to be able to align your experience to the private sector. Next one, recognized as the top 5% of officers in performance. I see this all the time, and it's primarily because people are like, I don't know what to put. That's okay. You're not supposed to know what to put. And the reason I say that is it's not like your department is preparing you for this step. So let's talk about this. Even in patrol, we're evaluated on metrics, number of traffic stops, number of felonies, number of reports, number of X. We have all these different metrics that we're being evaluated on. So instead of saying I was recognized as the top 5% of officers, say I was evaluated on 15 key performance indicators, i.e. metrics, and consistently recognized in the top 5% of 60 people for productivity. We put 60 people so people realize what top 5% actually means. It's a big deal. That means you're in the top, 3 of 60 people for productivity, which is a pretty big deal when you think about the private sector literally runs on productivity. So we always want to talk about context here. We don't want to just say top 5%. We want to talk about top 5% of what. So I hope this is super helpful for you. This doesn't just apply to patrol either. Most of us, no matter what our occupation is, are judged and evaluated by some sort of metric. If I put you and someone else who has similar number of years of experience and a similar background together side by side, tell me what separates you two based on the job that you do. How do you get evaluated, etc. So there's always something to say about this. Next one, we're going to jump into federal law enforcement. So Fed is a little bit different from local and state. So this was from a supervisor I recently did. He said he fixed a budgeting system left over from a predecessor. Okay, sounds pretty cool. Let's talk about why that matters though. Like, what was the problem? What action did you take? And then what was the result? I call this the CAR methodology: challenge, action, result. Always think about it from this perspective, because you are painting a picture for the recruiter, the hiring manager, whoever's reading your resume, and they're already going to make a judgment about you. It's up to you what kind of judgment they make. So for me, I want people to know exactly what I've done before I even get to the interview, because I want them to be able to envision me in the role that I'm applying for, rather than just guessing whether I'm going to be a good fit. So this would be more appropriately described as a story, meaning it's multiple sentences long, and that's okay on a resume as long as it's concise and it doesn't fill up half a page. We don't want to ramble here, but we want to talk about what the challenge was, what action was taken, and ultimately why it matters. So, managed an inefficient budgeting process that strayed from best practice accounting principles and inability to articulate reasoning. That's the challenge. Implemented a standardized reporting system for budget request submissions across 6 entities, impacting 250 annual requests and saving not only millions of dollars in denied funding, but hundreds of thousands of hours in lost time. So that sentence, while a little long, combines the action and the result. Okay? These are particularly important for ECQs at the SES level. Sorry, it's been a long day. So when you're thinking about how do I sell myself for a SAC or higher position, stories are a perfect way to do that. When I deal with SES guys, they usually send me all their ECQs, and I take that page and a half example, and I distill it down to one single bullet point, usually 3 or 4 sentences to describe the story, because every single hiring manager out there has a problem. That's why they're hiring for that role. They're trying to get you to solve that problem. And so if they can see how you approach critical thinking and problem solving and all these other soft skills through the stories that you're articulating in a resume, much easier to come to a decision on whether they want to interview you versus not. Next example. Change the hiring process and save significant time. Okay. How? Overhaul the enterprise cyber hiring process, resulting from an average 2-year process, and implemented a Schedule A cyber hiring authority, decreasing the time required to hire by 94% and saving 16,000 hours on average per hire. This enabled the agency to transition from 2 years on average to 45 days. Well, if anyone on this call or who watches this video has ever applied through USA Jobs, you know what a pain in the butt it is. So this would automatically mean the world to anyone who's familiar with USA Jobs. But even if they didn't, even if they had no idea what the federal hiring process is, you implementing a solution that decreases the time required to hire by 94% or 2 years to 45 days, any hiring manager or talent acquisition authority is going to say, whoa, that's significant time and cost savings. So, like I said, it doesn't necessarily matter that people aren't familiar with USA Jobs. They should be familiar, though, with time and cost savings and what a huge deal this is. Next one, created a new team with 100 million in seizures. Obviously, 100 million jumps right out at you. But we want to talk about, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean new team? What did you do, etc.? And so we expound on this a little bit, and we say, led the design and implementation of the digital assets team with established relationships throughout the crypto space, leading to the seizure of 98 million in laundered proceeds. Okay, now we have a bit more information. This was focused on digital assets, primarily crypto, and 98 million in Bitcoin or crypto were seized. Now we have a lot more context from which to make a judgment, an opinion, etc. Next one. Oversaw multiple vendor evaluation processes. Okay, we're talking about RFPs, request for proposals. This is huge in the private sector. This is big in the public sector too, but no one really calls it RFP. They call it procurement. And so understanding the difference in the terminology can be big. So after led 30 plus RFPs totaling $50 million, including a $1.6 million RFP for an AI-based data analysis tool responsible for saving 8.7 million hours. Whoa. If I'm a hiring manager and data analysis or RFPs or procurement is any way part of my requirements, I want to interview this guy for the sole purpose of asking him how he saved 8.7 million hours. What was the problem for that specific example? What was he trying to solve for? Again, this resume can either describe how you are a great fit for the role and how you approach all these different problems, or you can just be super generic and hope that someone sees all the gold that's hiding underneath. Next one, fixed the case management system and made it better. Look, I get it. Resumes aren't really a big deal in law enforcement or in the government world in general. And it's not like we're all given a guidebook on how to successfully create a resume. This is why myself and the resources that are out there exist to inform you and give you really solid information that doesn't cost anything. Okay, so the after. Inherited a nationwide case management program for external tips suffering from non-compliance and implemented a comprehensive solution resulting in 100% compliance across 10 performance benchmarks. Anyone out there is going to recognize what a big deal that is, because compliance and non-compliance in the private sector usually results in businesses being shut down, massive fines from financial regulators or other regulators. They result in litigation, all of which costs significant time and money. So something like this, really, really valuable. Next, managed a domestic terrorism case leading to the arrest of a suspect. Okay, pretty cool. No one likes terrorists. Domestic terrorism even less so. But let's talk about why this matters. Let's delve into it and let's try to align some of the aspects of that investigation to the private sector. Oversaw a complex domestic extremism investigation involving 300 subpoenas and the coordination of 100 people across multiple states. Okay, already this is a lot more complex than the original bullet point. Automated the information collection process by creating quick reference sheets, subpoena tracking, and a streamlined share folder for all personnel, leading to annual time savings of 8,700 hours. Wow. Okay. One caveat with this. I understand that most of you guys, whether you work in law enforcement or not, are not sitting down and just writing out your best stories while they're happening or after they're happening. That's not something that's ingrained in us. But let me tell you something. You should absolutely be doing that, because you will not remember some of this stuff a few years down the road, and trying to ballpark is not nearly as successful as having rigid numbers. So if you're not keeping track of all the amazing things that you're doing, even if you don't have all of the metrics and stuff like that, write it down, save it for the transition process. Okay, now we're going to jump into financial services, banking, if you will. Conducted fraud investigations. Yes, I see this sentence all the time. So let's talk about this. Know your audience. The reason I say this is KYC, or know your customer, is a very heavily used term in the banking and AML investigative space, because banks want to know who they're banking with. That's why we provide all the information we do for the USA Patriot Act and stuff like that. When I say know your audience, I say think about who is reading this and what they investigate. So if you're applying for a bank job, understand what banks investigate and align your experience to that. So for AML, people are like, I don't have a money laundering experience. Fraud is the foundation of AML. So you don't get to AML without knowing how to conduct basic fraud investigations. So let's talk about this. Conducted 150 investigations focused on what the bank cares about: credit card fraud, account takeover, identity theft, and money laundering. Obviously, if all of this doesn't apply to you, then you would just mix and match. But you want to tell your audience why you're the best fit. Fraud investigations, okay, that's the bare minimum. But identifying the specific typologies that the bank cares about, much more impactful. Next, I talked to a loan officer the other day. He said he increased loan production by 43%. Okay, give me the context. Tell me how you did that and ultimately why it matters. So he created a metric tracking sheet, which was adopted department-wide. Already pretty cool, saving approximately 11,000 hours annually and increasing loan production by 43% monthly, or $9.6 million annually. Wow. Okay. If I'm hiring for a loan officer, I would want to interview this guy, because he is telling me that not only is he automating super inefficient processes and saving a lot of time, which is equitable to saving money, but he's also increasing the amount of money that we're making exponentially through loans. Next, decreased operational expenses by auditing teller door outages. Okay, if you work in banking, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. What I want to know is, how did you do that? Again, context. Implemented a new audit procedure in response to an increase in teller door outages and decreased the incidence by 100%. You solved the problem, saving approximately $7,500 annually in operating expenses. Tell the story. Tell why it matters. And even if you don't know the specific number, ballpark, approximate, because all of this stuff is gold when it comes to identifying value and what separates you from everybody else who may be applying. Revamped investigative procedures and decreased the risk of OCC fines. Again, context. Inherited a production environment and risk of significant financial penalties from filing late SARs. Okay, anyone who's in the SAR game, you know exactly what this person is talking about. Led the initiative to streamline and revamp the investigative procedures, decreasing the time required to complete a case by 25%, or from 4 to 3 hours. Okay, think about how many SARs are being filed annually by every financial institution. Hundreds of thousands of SARs, depending on the size of the FI. Now, take that number and shave off an hour from every single one. And that's the minimum number of hours we are now saving, allowing our people to be more efficient, to handle a higher caseload. There's so many different positives that come out of this one example. Next, project management. We're going to talk about this as well. Manage multiple projects and personnel. Again, know your audience. So instead of saying that, which is super generic, now let's talk about, I managed 2 direct reports and a $500,000 budget while leading 30 plus projects using the waterfall methodology. Again, be as specific as possible. No one reading this resume or reading this information is going to try to read between the lines or guess. They want to know what you've done. Next, created a SharePoint system and brought the company into the digital age. Okay, I'm intrigued. What does this mean? Inherited a maintenance business unit with an inefficient database management system consisting of 30 separate databases. Man, I know some of you are rolling your eyes already. That's huge. Collaborated with IT and transitioned the system to SharePoint over 3 months, saving approximately 1.2 million hours annually for 6,000 annual work orders, and ensured accountability was at 100%. Massive project, massive ROI that anyone can understand, especially people who handle complex projects. Next, managed multiple contracts and saved significant money in negotiations. Okay, if this is all you have, it's not a bad bullet point. But if we can delve into it further, by all means, let's do it. Evaluated 10 external vendors and determined none of them were meeting contractual obligations, wasting approximately $30,000 annually. That's the problem. Executed a new RFP for all impacted vendors and saved approximately $200,000 annually through guaranteed hourly rates and contractual benchmarks. Any of you who are involved in vendor compliance in any way, shape, or form know what a huge deal this is. So imagine what it looks like on a resume. Next, save significant time and money by digitizing manual processes. Okay. Identified an extremely manual investigative processes resulting from an over-reliance on pen and paper and implemented a digital program which provided multi-purpose iPads to 15 people. This resulted in saving thousands of annual manpower hours by providing numerous tools in a single location and automating activities. Okay. Now, you'll notice that we don't have a metric here for the thousands of hours. That's because it was either impossible to guess or we didn't have a way to successfully do so. So we guesstimated, and that's okay. Next, let's jump into sales a little bit. If you're in sales, you run on data. There's no reason why your sales resume should not have a lot of data reflected on there because that's all you are being judged on. I saw this sentence the other day, closed multiple sales. Okay, that doesn't really tell me a whole heck of a lot, but let's jump into it. Negotiated 15 or more sales, resulting in approximately $85,000. This was a 30% higher closing rate than the rest of the company. Okay, now I have a little bit more context here. I know how many sales you did, what it grossed the company, and why it really matters. Next, increase sales by 300% year over year. You already know what I'm going to say. How'd you do it? What was the original number? Increase sales by 300% year over year, or from 50,000 to 150,000 through overhauling cold call methods and implementing social media advertising, driving impressions up to 2 million annually. Okay, this gives me a lot more context than how you were able to do that. The why is almost more important than the actual number because that shows me how you think and how you process. Now let's jump into military. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on sales because, again, you guys live on metrics. So let's do the military. This was an intelligence guy in the military. Saved significant time by changing the way databases process data. Okay. A whole lot of nothing is right here. Created a script for intelligence databases, significantly decreasing the time required to complete each transaction from 416 hours to 5 minutes. Holy crap. If you're someone waiting on intelligence and it takes 416 hours and now you're getting it in 5 minutes, that's the guy I want to hire, especially if he can code, which is what creating a script means, by the way. So again, try to identify the problem, the action that you took to solve it, and what the actual measurable result was. Next one. Served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan while overseeing a group of Marines. I see a combination of this all the time. So instead, let's break this down. Managed an international team, because you're operating internationally, operating in a high-risk environment while providing security assessments and executive protection. Okay, now I still think we can go a lot more deeper into this from a metric perspective, but this kind of gives you an idea of how to slowly transition that super generic initial sentence into something that means something in the private sector. Next, protected multiple VIPs outside the wire. Okay, outside the wire is a military term. We don't want to use that on a private sector resume. Managed and participated in 30 plus full spectrum protection details for U.S. and foreign dignitaries focused on close protection, motorcades, residential security, threat assessments, and protective intelligence. Awesome. We're using corporate terminology. We're telling about the principles that we protected, both U.S. and foreign, and the different aspects of protection that we were involved with or managed, all of which is super important to private sector employers. Intel community, let's talk about you and we'll wrap up this video. Managed a team of Intel analysts. Okay, let's break it down. Managed 5 Intel analysts responsible for creating 500 plus intelligence products annually for 15 internal and external stakeholders. We're telling them how many directs we have, how many products they were responsible for, and who their audience was. Change the way Intel analysts are utilized during crisis incidents. Okay. Identified a lack of a crisis response plan and social media and collection team after multiple mass shootings. That's the problem. Drafted and briefed a white paper to senior leadership and created a local team which has responded to 30 plus crisis incidents or events to date. That's the action, and now we get to the result. This nationally recognized team has decreased the time required to stabilize an incident from 48 hours to 2 on average, and increased training on information sharing by 60% from 20 hours annually. Wow. Okay. Now we have a good understanding of what this consists of and why it matters. First, next one. Created a new research process for analysis. You already know what I'm going to say. Tell me more. Designed an innovative research process responsible for mining a comprehensive list of corroborated information sources, which has been implemented in every field office worldwide. Now, you may be wondering, where are the metrics? This program was just implemented, and so the individual that we were doing the resume for didn't have any metrics. But now we understand what the problem was and where it's been implemented, which says a lot about the efficacy of this individual process. Next slide, or final slide. Took over a new team and brought it up to best in class. How? Inherited an underperforming team that had been without formal leadership for 18 months and was suffering from substandard quality. Achieved a 200% increase in quality over 10 months through mentoring, coaching, and undergoing additional professional development in analytic writing. That gives me a fantastic example of how this person approaches leadership, mentoring, coaching, people development, all the above. Again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. I would suggest that you can really, really increase the quality of your interviews and how many interviews you're actually getting by adopting this process and taking it from generic to super specific and concise. That's my experience, and that's the experience with a lot of the clients that I have. At the end of the day, think about it from this perspective. If you're the recruiter and you're looking at these resumes, which person would you want to interview? Which person would give you the most information about whether you're going to be a good fit or not? And that's obviously a rhetorical question. I think it's always going to be the second one, but you have to make a decision what's best for you. And at the end of the day, I hope this has been a really informative overview of multiple different industries and areas that people transition from or need resume help in. I handle a lot more than just these, but this is meant to give you a really broad overview. If you like it, if you think it's super helpful, please let me know. Comment on the post, reshare it to your network, send me a PM. If you get on my website and you're like, you know what, I can't afford this guy, still book a call with me. I offer free 30-minute phone calls to everyone because I want to give you this information so you can implement it in your own life. Whether or not you book a package with me, I could care less. Honestly, I could care less. I want you to have the information so you can make a really informed decision for you and your family if applicable. Information should not be held captive by someone's ability to pay. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope this was informative. Y'all have a great day.